After relentless Allied bombardments on Okinawa, the last bastion before Japan's shores, April 12, 1945 witnessed a drastic turn. Pushed to their limits, the Japanese forces orchestrated a massive kamikaze assault, unparalleled in scale and desperation. That afternoon, the sky above Okinawa transformed into a battleground. A swarm of kamikaze planes, each manned by a pilot with a singular, grim mission, descended upon the Allied ships. Among those in the crosshairs was USS Idaho, a battleship whose valor and might had become the stuff of legend. On this day, Idaho, affectionately known as the Big Spud, braced for an unprecedented challenge. 5 kamikaze pilots singled her out, diving out of the sun's blinding light in a tactical maneuver designed to confuse and overwhelm her gunners. This approach rendered Idaho's lower defenses, the 20mm guns, ineffective as the aircraft skimmed perilously close to the ocean's surface. Yet, as the kamikaze planes bore down, the ship's 40mm guns were ready to destroy anything that dared come too close to the Big Spud. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the battleship USS Idaho was stationed in Valfjordur, Iceland, protecting American advance bases. 2 days later, she and her sister ship, Mississippi, departed the icy Atlantic waters toward Hawaii, eventually returning to America in January. For most of the year, Idaho and her crew of 1,081 officers and enlisted men were busy and occupied with combat exercises off the coast of California. As a New Mexico-class battleship, Idaho launched in 1915. Her design reflected early 20th century technology, like turboelectric propulsion for greater efficiency that enabled the vessel to reach speeds of up to 21 knots, an excellent pace for a ship of that size at the time, with over 600 feet and a displacement of over 32,000 tons. Still, by the 1940s, this veteran ship's main battery of 12 14-inch guns, arranged in 4 triple turrets, was becoming outdated. In October 1942, Idaho entered Puget Sound Navy Yard to receive replacements for her worn-out main battery guns. At the time, America needed 14-inch guns like hers to engage enemy ships in shore positions with devastating effect. After emerging from Puget Sound with upgraded guns, USS Idaho continued to test more technologies and operational concepts in the warm California and Hawaii waters, including carrier aviation and amphibious warfare, central to naval strategy. As a new year arrived, the crew members aboard the battleship were eagerly awaiting their first battle deployment. In March, the ship was loaded with large supplies of food, and much to the crewmen's surprise, box after box of cold weather clothing and gear. On April 7, 1943, USS Idaho finally departed Long Beach. Once deep into the sea, Idaho's commanding officer, Captain H.D. Clark, finally announced their destination, the Aleutian Islands. A long chain of volcanic islands extending westward from the Alaskan Peninsula towards Japan. 2 of the biggest islands, Attu and Kiska, had been occupied by more than 2,500 Japanese troops back in June 1942 as part of a diversionary action during the Battle of Midway. The occupation of what came to be known as the Alaskan Theater posed a direct threat to the American mainland and also sought to dilute the American forces in the Pacific. For this effort, USS Idaho would serve the crucial role of flagship of the bombardment and patrol force around Attu. As such, she would be central in coordinating and executing naval gunfire support and softening enemy defenses ahead of the main U.S. Army's assault. As the battleship floated towards Alaska, the valuable New Mexico-class Idaho was surrounded by destroyer escorts, ready to defend her against any enemy submarine. On April 16th, right before noon, the men aboard the ship saw their first bit of land, the start of the Aleutian Island chain, since they'd left California 10 days ago. That night, everyone slept with one eye open, nervous about the start of operations. According to aviation radio man observer William Schumann's memoir, quote, "I know that action will come soon enough, but this waiting is creating an uneasy feeling. Everyone is geared up to strike our first blow at our enemy." On May 11, 1943, after a long wait, the moment of reckoning arrived for USS Idaho, the Big Spud. At 3:30 p.m., her new and improved 14-inch main battery guns unleashed their first salvos at the Japanese on Attu for a little over 45 minutes of unrelenting fury, with 2 of the turrets guided by radar. The beginning of the end for the Japanese in Alaska had begun. That day, USS Pennsylvania and USS Nevada, two ships that were present during Pearl Harbor and suffered substantial damage and casualties, exacted their sweet revenge upon the enemy, firing their main batteries and bombs. For the rest of the afternoon, the rumble of bombs from attacking planes and guns was heard all over the island, slowly but surely evening the score against their new sworn enemy. That night, most men aboard were ordered to sleep with their clothes on, just in case they were called back to their battle stations. In the following months, the Battleship Idaho provided crucial bombardment support in the operations to retake the island chains. She destroyed enemy fortifications and supported American troops, all leading to a final concentrated blow on Kiska. On the early morning of August 15th, the Big Spud once again unleashed its firepower, this time on Kiska with its 14-inch and 5-inch batteries, firing alongside USS Portland. Both ships relied on radar, as fog blanketed most of the island, severely limiting visibility. The following morning, on Invasion Day, the battleship resumed firing. While the early hours had similar fog to the day before, by the afternoon, it was clear enough so that the crew could see the troops making for the beach. But there was something strange. No return fire from the enemy. That day, the Americans found out that the Japanese had already evacuated Kiska, thus abandoning their last foothold in the Aleutians. Still, through the Alaskan theater, the men aboard the battleship, now with a taste of battle, realized that it would be a very long and grueling uphill struggle to push the Japanese, an enemy fanatic enough to fight to the last man rather than submit to surrender, back to Tokyo. After her service in the frigid waters of Iceland, USS Idaho and her crew returned to San Francisco on September 7th to prepare for the next major amphibious operation in the Pacific. By then, the focus of American forces had fully pivoted toward the Central Pacific. USS Idaho was not just another battleship in the Pacific War. She was a strategic linchpin in the island-hopping campaign, a crucial component of the American offensive. This strategy aimed to capture key islands held by Japan, creating a pathway for an assault on the Japanese mainland. In the fall, the battleship unleashed her firepower in support of the amphibious landings on the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, dismantling Japanese fortifications, softening enemy defenses, and providing cover for the Marines and soldiers who stormed the beaches. In December 1943, she transitioned to the Marshall Islands, where she facilitated the capture of this vital atoll in an offensive and anti-aircraft cover role. During the summer of 1944, in the battles for Saipan and Guam, Idaho unleashed devastating barrages upon Japanese positions and safeguarded American landings against counterattacks, all while the Battle of the Philippine Sea raged nearby. From one island to the next, month after month, the journey of USS Idaho was fraught with danger. Hundreds of ships and thousands of men risked their lives every day, capturing territory and establishing airfields from which long-range bombers could strike the Japanese mainland. In late 1944, following the Battle of Peleliu, USS Idaho underwent one final significant refit, where her 5-inch 25 caliber guns were replaced by 10 5-inch 38 caliber guns in single enclosed mounts, enhancing her anti-aircraft capabilities, becoming the only ship of her class to receive this modification. Emerging from the yards as a one-of-a-kind ship, the Big Spud's path led her back to the Pacific's contested waters once again, her brand new guns ready to support the next wave of amphibious assaults. In the spring of 1945, with the Allied forces closer than ever to the Japanese mainland, all that was left before a full-scale invasion of Tokyo could take place was Operation Iceberg, an assault on the island of Okinawa. For this, Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, assembled the most massive amphibious fleet ever in the Pacific theater. Around mid-March, approximately 1,300 ships of all kinds, including troop transports, warships, and landing craft, began to fill the China Sea as far as the eye could reach. Beginning on the 25th for the pre-invasion naval bombardment, USS Idaho's guns pounded Okinawa, preparing the ground for the landing forces and providing critical support against Japanese defense as everyone prepared for the landings slated for April 1st. By the time the new month rolled around, the Japanese forces on the last remaining island were becoming desperate. Despite their own horrifying casualties, on April 12th, General Mitsuru Ushijima, the Japanese commander in charge of the defense of the island, orchestrated a determined last-stand defense against the Allies. This included some of the most vicious and numerous kamikaze bombers in an attempt to drive the vast fleet away. With this, USS Idaho would face her most grueling test yet. Sure enough, just before 3 p.m., swarms of enemy planes of all types started coming in on the American fleet nearby, and all hell broke loose. Near USS Idaho, one kamikaze was immediately shot down in a dogfight with carrier planes. Another came from the same direction and burst into flames just off her port quarter. A third then passed over the vessel's port beam by about 50 feet and then crashed in flames. The Japanese pilots had a sneaky way of coming from out of the sun, working with its glare, and flew just low enough to prevent radar detection. According to Marine and witness Harold Thomas, quote, "They were throwing everything they had at us. The kamikazes came in at every sunset." The following 5 minutes were pure chaos, with several Japanese models singling out the Big Spud as their main target. Receiving the full blast of the aircraft's weapons, which pumped lead as fast as possible, the gunners shot down 2 Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers and 2 Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers. But before the gunners could breathe, right behind the 4th, a 5th kamikaze plane, another Kate, followed right behind. As it zeroed in closer than the other 4, for a split second, everyone aboard deck thought it was all over. At the very last minute, however, the plane and its powerful 500-pound bomb hit Idaho's blister, one of the anti-torpedo bulges on each side. Because it splashed so close, less than 50 yards off, a tidal-like wave shook the entire ship, just as a fearsome explosion burst beneath the waves. As a result of this near miss, the detonation tore open the ship's armor, leaving a large ragged breach behind, with the once smooth hull now etched with a twisted pattern. With this, thousands of small pieces of the plane rained down on the quarterdeck. After the fire subsided, one of the crew members of Idaho, still half deaf from the loud explosion, found the Japanese pilot's wristwatch, with the crystal broken and forever stuck at the exact time the kamikaze bomber met his maker, 2:50 p.m. After their near-miss run-in, USS Idaho almost collided with the destroyer USS Zellers. But unlike the Big Spud, she hadn't fared so well. Dead in the water, Zellers was beginning to sink after one kamikaze struck her between the bridge and one of her turrets. Following the mass attack of April 12th, where USS Idaho shot down 5 kamikazes, the massive damage forced her into temporary repairs. After restorations for her incredible performance at the Battle of Okinawa on May 22nd, the veteran of so many of the landings of the Pacific Island hopping campaign returned to the island to resume fire support, where she remained until June, when she moved to Leyte Gulf until hostilities ceased on August 15, 1945. The end of the war came with a powerful transformation to naval warfare, including the advent of nuclear weapons and the rise of air power. As such, USS Idaho, like many of her 1910s contemporaries, found itself an anachronism in this new era, and in July 1946, after more than 3 decades of service, she was decommissioned.